All right, let's just jump right into this because you are not going to believe the headlines. A biotech company is making a wild claim. They've brought back the dire wolf. Yeah, that dire wolf, the Ice Age icon, a predator that hasn't been seen for thousands of years. It honestly sounds like something straight out of a movie. So this is the big announcement from a company called Colossal Biosciences. They're saying they've officially de-extincted the species, literally bridging a 13,000-year gap in natural history. And get this, they say they have the pups to prove it. 3 of them, actually. And they've named them Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi. And right there, that's where the story starts to get, well, complicated. A lot of scientists are pushing back, and they're arguing that whatever's been created, it's not some resurrected ancient beast, it's something else entirely. So what's the real story here? Well, that's exactly what we're going to find out. Okay, to really get what Colossal is claiming, you first have to understand the science. I mean, how on earth do you even begin to bring a species back from the dead? Turns out, scientists have a few different approaches for tackling this monumental task. You can basically boil it down to 3 main strategies in the de-extinction playbook. First up, you've got something called backbreeding. Second is cloning, which I'm sure you've heard of. And the third, the one that's really cutting edge, is genetic engineering. So let's start with backbreeding. Think of it like trying to remake a famous painting just by looking at a description of it. Take the quagga. It was this cool relative of the zebra that went extinct back in 1883. Scientists in the Quagga project found zebras that had traits similar to the quagga, fewer stripes, and just kept breeding them together. What they got is an animal that looks almost exactly like a quagga. But here's the key. Its DNA isn't the same. It's a look-alike, not a true genetic copy. Then you have cloning. And this brings us to the really tragic story of the bucardo, which was a type of Spanish goat. Scientists actually managed to clone it after it went extinct. A baby was born, the species was back for a fleeting moment, but just 10 minutes later, the clone died from a lung defect. The bucardo holds the strange distinction of being the only animal to go extinct twice. It's a pretty powerful lesson in just how ridiculously hard this process can be. And that brings us to door number 3, the most modern method of all, genetic engineering. And specifically, we're talking about a tool called CRISPR-Cas9. The easiest way to think about it is like a pair of genetic scissors. It gives scientists the power to find super-specific parts of an animal's DNA and then snip, paste, and edit them with incredible precision. And this is the technology at the very heart of our dire wolf story. So how did Colossal Biosciences take this high-tech playbook and whip up their so-called dire wolf? Let's take a look at the actual recipe they used, step by step. Their whole process really boils down to 5 major steps. First, you gotta find some ancient dire wolf DNA. Second, you compare that old DNA to its closest living relative. Third, you pick out the key genes that you think made a dire wolf, and you edit them into the modern DNA. Fourth, you create embryos with that newly edited code. And finally, you implant those embryos into a surrogate mom and you hope for the best. Now, step 1 alone was a massive hurdle. DNA just falls apart over time. Their best samples came from a 13,000-year-old tooth and a 70,000-year-old skull. Now, the company says these fossils gave them 500 times more data than they ever had before. But, and this is a big but, they haven't actually said what percentage of the complete genome they recovered. That is a pretty critical missing piece of this whole puzzle. So, with these ancient DNA fragments, they moved on to step 2, finding a modern blueprint. They landed on the gray wolf as the closest living relative. Turns out its DNA is a 99.5% match to the dire wolf. That made it the perfect genetic starting point, the perfect chassis to build on. Now for the big editing job. So out of the millions upon millions of genes that make up a wolf's genome, how many did Colossal decide to change to turn a gray wolf into a dire wolf? The answer is just 14. That's it. They focused on genes they believed were linked to external traits, things like a bigger body, a wider head, maybe a different fur color. And finally, it was go time. In mid-2024, they created 45 of these edited embryos and implanted them into surrogate dogs. On October 1st, 2 male pups, Romulus and Remus, were born. Then, on January 30th of the next year, a little female named Khaleesi joined them. The dire wolf, or at least something that looked like it, was alive. Look, this all sounds like a huge scientific achievement, right? And in a lot of ways, it is. But this is the point where we really have to pump the brakes and ask the tough question. What did they actually create? Is it more gray wolf than true dire wolf? To really get the critique here, you need some perspective. A gray wolf and an ancient dire wolf are 99.5% genetically identical. That sounds incredibly close, right? But think about this. Humans and chimpanzees share 98.8% of their DNA. That tiny 1.2% difference, well, it accounts for everything that makes us human. So that 0.5% gap between the two wolf species, it's actually a massive genetic canyon. And this gets right to the heart of the problem. Colossal edited just 14 genes. When you're talking about millions of genes in the wolf genome, that's less than 0.0001% of the total genetic code. It's a tiny, tiny sliver. They've essentially left that 99.5% match almost completely untouched. Which leads us to the conclusion that a lot of people in the scientific community have reached. This is not a de-extinction, it's not a dire wolf. What it is a gray wolf that's been genetically modified to have a handful of dire wolf-like features. It's a functionally new animal for sure, but it is not a resurrected ancient one. And beyond the whole scientific definition, this project cracks open this huge can of worms, all these profound ethical questions about what it even means to bring a species back and why we're doing it. What's the real cost of this revival? I mean, try to see it from the animal's perspective for a second. These pups have no dire wolf parents to teach them how to be dire wolves, how to hunt, how to behave. They're going to spend their entire lives in a high-security preserve, basically being a living exhibit for wealthy visitors. They're a scientific showpiece, a curiosity, living in a cage, not a wild animal being returned to nature. And that brings up an even bigger ecological issue. The huge animals that dire wolves used to prey on, they're extinct too. So, if you were to release these new animals into the wild, what would they even eat? They'd be in direct competition with modern gray wolves for food, and that could completely throw a fragile ecosystem out of whack. You have to ask, does this ancient predator even have a role to play in our 21st century world? Colossal Biosciences has raised over $150 million for its de-extinction projects. That is an absolutely staggering amount of money, of talent, of technology, all focused on bringing back species that are already gone. Now, I want you to contrast that massive number with this one. 2. That's how many northern white rhinos are left on the entire planet. An entire species is just hanging on by a thread, mostly because of us. And that really leads to the final, crucial question here. Is the future of conservation really about spending hundreds of millions of dollars to resurrect the past? Or should we be focusing all of that incredible brainpower and all those resources on protecting the thousands of species that are on the brink of disappearing right now? It really makes you wonder if that old saying is true, that maybe an ounce of prevention is worth way, way more than a pound of cure.